They forgot that before I was a grandfather, I spent 31 years as a Crown prosecutor. I retired in 2019, and I suppose to some people that means I became soft, harmless. Just an old man in Scarborough who feeds the birds and watches hockey on Saturday nights. My daughter and her husband made that mistake. I found out on a Tuesday morning in March. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching the ice still sitting on the lake, when my phone buzzed with a notification. My daughter had posted photos on Instagram. I almost never look at Instagram, but something made me tap it. A post from the night before. She and her husband on the deck of a cruise ship, glasses of wine raised, my grandson Aiden between them, grinning in a life jacket. The caption read, "Family vacation, just us three. The Maritimes to Bermuda, 14 days, finally. Just the three of them." I set my coffee down very slowly. My granddaughter Zoe was not in the photo. She was 8 years old and she had been living with my daughter and her husband for 3 years. Not a stepchild, not a foster child. She was their legally adopted daughter. She had a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit. She called my daughter Mama. She had a bedroom decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling because she told me once that she wanted to feel like she was sleeping outside without being scared. She was not in the photo. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Zoe stayed with a friend. Maybe she was nervous on boats. I made myself finish my coffee before I called my daughter's number. It went to voicemail. I called her husband's number. Voicemail. Sat very still for a moment, and then I did what any grandfather does when he needs answers quickly. I called Zoe's school. The receptionist told me Zoe had been marked absent for the week. She asked if everything was all right. I said everything was fine, thank you, and I hung up. Then I called the woman 3 doors down from my daughter's house. A retired teacher named Beverly, who had my number in her phone because I'd asked her a year ago to keep an eye on things while the family traveled. Beverly answered on the second ring. I asked her as casually as I could manage whether she happened to know where Zoe was. There was a pause. "She's here," Beverly said. "She's been here since Sunday. Your daughter asked me to look after her for 2 weeks. I thought you knew." I did not know. Beverly was kind. She said Zoe was doing fine, eating well, sleeping okay. She said she was a good little girl. I asked. Beverly put her on. "Grandpa?" Zoe's voice was so small over the phone, not crying, worse than crying, careful, like she was trying very hard to sound normal. "Did you know they went on a trip?" "I just found out, sweetheart. Aiden got to go. They said the boat wasn't good for me, but I think it was because of money." 8 years old. Already making excuses for them because the truth was too sharp to hold. I kept my voice steady. "Are you being looked after?" "Yes." Beverly made me scrambled eggs. "Good. Scrambled eggs are important." She laughed a little. Then she said in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, "Grandpa, why didn't they take me?" I closed my eyes. I had cross-examined hardened criminals for 3 decades. I had sat across from people who had done terrible things and I had kept my face completely neutral. I did that now. I did it for her. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to find out. And I want you to know something, okay? You are exactly where you are supposed to be in this family." "Do you hear me?" She said she heard me. I hung up. I stood at my kitchen window for a long time. Then I went to my office. The thing about being a Crown prosecutor for 31 years is that you learn above everything else not to act on emotion. Emotion makes you sloppy. Emotion gets cases thrown out. What you do instead is build. You gather, you document. You give people the rope they need, and then you let them tie the knot themselves. My son-in-law's name was Preston. He worked in commercial real estate. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's all she is to me right now, had quit her job 4 years earlier to focus on the family. That had always puzzled me slightly, because she had been a sharp accountant, but I respected her choices. She and Preston had Aiden 8 years ago. Then 3 years ago they had come to me and her mother. Her mother passed 18 months ago, God rest her, and told us they wanted to adopt. They had found Zoe through the provincial system. She had been in 2 previous foster homes. She deserved permanence, they said. She deserved a real family. I had written a check for $15,000 to help cover the legal costs in the transition process. Preston had said that was too generous. I had said family doesn't keep score. I keep score now. I pulled up the cruise line's website. The ship was the Norwegian Encore. It had departed Halifax on Sunday, March 9th. 14-day itinerary. Current position, somewhere in the Atlantic heading toward Bermuda. Return date, March 23rd. I looked at flights. I looked at ship-to-shore communication systems. I looked at the per-person pricing for last-minute cabins. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my brother-in-law, who is a family court lawyer in Ottawa. I didn't give him many details. I just asked a few hypothetical questions about what constitutes differential treatment of a legally adopted child within the family home, and whether a documented pattern of exclusion could meet the threshold for a child welfare referral. He said, hypothetically, yes. Hypothetically, it could. The second call was to Beverly. I asked her to take photos of Zoe every day and send them to me. Photos of meals, photos of Zoe doing homework, photos of where she was sleeping. Beverly understood without me having to explain. She was a retired teacher. She had seen a lot. The third call was to a travel agent I had used for 20 years. I asked her to find me one last-minute cabin on the Norwegian Encore. She called back 40 minutes later. There was a single interior cabin available, deck 7. $1,400 Canadian. It was not cheap. It did not matter. I gave her my credit card number and asked her to also book me a flight from Pearson to Halifax leaving that evening, which was the fastest way to join the ship before it cleared Canadian waters. They had a port stop in Sydney, Nova Scotia the following morning. I was on the 6:15 p.m. Air Canada flight. I did not tell my daughter or Preston I was coming. Let me tell you something about cruise ships. They are much harder to hide on than people imagine. They are, at their core, a floating small town. Everyone eats in the same dining rooms. Everyone uses the same pool deck. Everyone attends the same evening shows. I found them at dinner on my second night aboard, in the main dining room on deck 6. They were at a table for 3 by the window. Preston was wearing a linen shirt. Aiden had a Shirley Temple. My daughter was laughing at something Preston had said. She looked relaxed in a way I had not seen her look in years. I stood there for a moment, watching before I walked over. Preston saw me first. I watched the color leave his face in real time. "Dad," my daughter said. She used the word like a question. "Your table's only set for 3, I said. I pulled out the empty chair and sat down. "That's a coincidence. I'm traveling alone." I ordered a coffee. I asked Aiden how the ship was treating him. He said it was awesome. There was a water slide. I told him that sounded like a lot of fun. He asked if Zoe could come next time. Preston and my daughter exchanged a look. I let the silence sit. That's another thing 31 years teaches you. Silence is a tool. Most people fill it with things they shouldn't say. "We thought a shorter trip might be better for Zoe," my daughter finally said. "She gets anxious. The ocean can be overwhelming." "That's interesting," I said. Because I spoke to her on Sunday and she seemed mostly confused about why she didn't get to come. Not anxious, confused. She's fine with Beverly. She's 8 years old and she's staying with a neighbor, while her family takes a 14-day cruise to Bermuda, I said. She asked me why you didn't take her. "What do you want me to tell her the next time she calls?" My daughter said, "Dad, this isn't the place." "No," I agreed. "It really isn't." I finished my coffee and said good night. The next morning I went to the guest services desk and asked to speak with the ship's social worker. Every cruise ship that size has one. She was a calm, professional woman in her 40s named, well, her name doesn't matter. What matters is that I described the situation clearly and factually. A legally adopted child had been left in the informal care of a neighbor, while her legal parents and biological sibling took an expensive 14-day vacation. I had documentation of the adoption on my phone. I had Beverly's photos. I had screenshots of the Instagram post with its timestamp. She thanked me and said she would note it. I also that afternoon sent a detailed email to the Ontario Child Welfare Intake Line. Not a call, an email, so there would be a timestamp and a paper trail. I described the pattern I had observed over the past year, not just this trip. The birthday parties where Aiden got elaborate celebrations and Zoe got a quiet dinner. The hockey registration fees Preston paid without blinking for Aiden, and the missed gymnastics registration for Zoe because money was tight. The school trip Aiden went on in October, and the one Zoe stayed home from in November. I had noticed all of it. I had said nothing at the time because I had hoped I was wrong. I was not wrong. I sent the email and then I went and sat on the upper deck and watched the Atlantic for a while. Preston found me there an hour later. He sat down in the chair beside me without being invited. He had changed out of the linen shirt. He looked like a man who had been having a very uncomfortable conversation with my daughter. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he said. "Sitting," I said. "It's a lovely view. You reported us." "I provided information to a child welfare intake line, yes. That's a legal obligation in Ontario if you have reasonable grounds to believe a child may be in need of protection." I had reasonable grounds. "That's insane." She was left with a responsible adult. "She's fine." I turned and looked at him directly. "She called me and asked me why you didn't take her. She is 8 years old. She has already been in 2 foster homes. She has already been told twice in her short life that she was not wanted enough to keep. And you put her in a neighbor's house for 2 weeks and took her brother to Bermuda. You want to explain to me how that's fine?" Preston opened his mouth. "Don't," I said quietly. "I spent 31 years listening to people explain themselves. I can always tell when someone knows they're wrong and is hoping the other person will blink first. I don't blink, Preston. It is not something I know how to do." He stood up. He said some things I will not repeat. He walked away. My daughter came to my cabin that evening. She knocked and I let her in. We sat at the small table by the porthole and she cried, which I had expected, and she told me I had gone too far, which I had also expected. I said, "Tell me why you didn't take her." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She's not the same. She doesn't fit the same way." Preston and Aiden have this bond. I feel like I'm always in the middle trying to hold two different things together, and I just wanted 2 weeks where it was easy. I had not expected that, the honesty of it. I said, I understand that parenting is hard. I understand that blended families are complicated. What I cannot accept is solving that problem by teaching a little girl that she is less than her brother, that she is a guest in her own home. Because that is what you are teaching her, whether you mean to or not. My daughter put her face in her hands. She notices everything, I said. She is bright, and she is watching, and she is 8 years old. And right now, every single signal you are sending her is telling her that she was right to be afraid she'd never find a real home. The porthole was fogged with cold. The ship moved beneath us. What have you done? She finally asked, with the report. What happens now? What happens now is that when you get home, a worker will likely contact you for an assessment. It will not be dramatic if you cooperate. It will be a conversation, but it will be on record, and that matters. And the other thing that happens, I said, is that Zoe is not going to Beverly's anymore. When you travel, she comes to me. When you need a break, she comes to me. And I will be watching much more closely than I have been. You're not her parent, no. But I'm the person who called her on Sunday and promised her she belonged in this family, and I do not make promises I can't keep. She left without saying much more. The rest of the trip was not pleasant. Preston avoided me. My daughter was civil in a stiff, fragile way. Aiden, who understood none of it, showed me the water slide and told me he'd caught a fish off the side of the ship, which was almost certainly not true, but I told him I believed him. On the last evening at sea, Preston made one more attempt. He cornered me near the cafe on deck 9 and told me that if I continued to interfere in their family, he would consider it harassment, and his lawyer would have something to say about it. I looked at him. Preston, I said, I was a Crown prosecutor. I know what harassment is. I also know what differential treatment of a child looks like under the Child, Youth and Family Services Act. I know what financial documentation looks like, and what a paper trail looks like, and how long child welfare concerns stay on record. You may absolutely have your lawyer call my lawyer. My brother-in-law will be delighted to hear from him. Preston walked away. He did not bring it up again. When we docked in Halifax, I flew home ahead of them. I went directly to Beverly's house. She met me at the door with Zoe right behind her, in a purple sweater holding Biscuit the rabbit. Zoe looked at me for a moment, and then she crossed the porch and put her arms around my waist and said nothing. I held on. Did you have scrambled eggs every day? I asked into the top of her head. Almost every day. Beverly also made French toast. French toast, I said. That's not bad. I stayed for an hour. I read her 3 chapters of the book she was working through. A story about a girl who finds a door in her grandmother's garden that leads somewhere completely unexpected. Zoe fell asleep before the end of the 3rd chapter, which I had been counting on. Beverly walked me to the door. What happens now? She asked. I don't know exactly, I said. But I know this. I should have been paying more attention sooner. And I should have said something a long time before now. Beverly nodded. She was not the kind of person who says things like, you did the right thing. She just looked at me steadily. She's a good kid, she said. She is an extraordinary kid, I said. She just doesn't know it yet. I drove home in the dark. The 401 was quiet for once. I had the radio off. I thought about all the things I had spent 3 decades prosecuting. People who had done deliberate harm, calculated harm, harm that required planning and intent. And I thought about the other kind. The harm that happens in the space between good intentions and lazy love. The harm that looks like nothing at all, until you see it through the eyes of an 8-year-old asking why her brother got to go and she didn't. There is a phrase I used in summation sometimes, when the defense wanted to argue that a defendant had simply made a thoughtless choice, hadn't really meant anything by it. I used to say, the harm does not care about your intentions. The harm is the harm. The child welfare assessment happened 6 weeks later. My daughter and Preston cooperated. The workers' report noted several concerns about consistent differential treatment between the 2 children and recommended a family support plan, including counseling. No removal, but documentation, a file. A record that would follow them. Preston did not speak to me for 4 months. My daughter called me 2 weeks after the assessment. She said she had started individual sessions with a therapist. She said some things were becoming clearer to her that had been blurry for a long time. She did not apologize in so many words, but she called. And on Zoe's 9th birthday in June, I drove to Brampton and arrived to find a proper party, not a quiet dinner. Aiden was wearing a silly hat and had crumbs on his chin. Zoe was wearing a paper crown and running around the backyard with a water gun, shrieking with joy, completely unguarded, not careful, not small, big. I stood on the back porch and watched her for a long time. She ran past me at one point and stopped and looked up at me with her water gun leveled at my knees. She had her mother's eyes, her biological mother's, whom I never met, but sometimes I see something in Zoe's face that must have come from somewhere else, something tough and surviving. I'm going to get you, Grandpa, she said. I have no doubt, I said. She soaked my left leg from knee to shoe. Then she ran away, laughing into the noise and the chaos of a birthday party that was finally exactly the right size for her. I lowered the paper plate in my hand. I looked at the yard, at my daughter talking to a neighbor, at Preston grilling something and looking, if I'm being honest, like a man who was trying, at Aiden who was now wearing the silly hat sideways, at Zoe spinning in circles in the middle of all of it. That is the only ending I wanted. Not punishment. Not the satisfaction of a conviction, the way I used to feel leaving a courtroom. Just that. A little girl with a water gun and a paper crown running in circles in her own backyard, belonging.